Who are you going to trust? The answer to that question, while sitting here in our church with sunlight streaming through those stained glass windows, looking up at the cross, is pretty obvious, isn't it? We are to trust God in all things, with all things. Christianity 101. We all know that, so let's take up the offering, sing the closing hymn, head out early for our Sunday drive, or lunch at the bistro, or go home and catch the second half of the game. No need to elaborate, as the correct answer is plain to see in both the question and in the gospel reading today. Hold on. The follow-up question is also very obvious. How's that working for you? That's when things get a little sticky. Because the pursuit of an absolute truth demands an absolutely honest answer. Who are you going to trust? How's that trusting God thing working? Not just now sitting in our sanctuary, but driving on North Reserve on Saturday afternoon, or stuck in a line at Wally Road, or listening to someone hyperventilate on talk radio. But today's very first verse, today's gospel lessons tell how we are to listen to the rest of the parable. It sets us up with a certain bias right from the very onset. Words like trusting in one's own self-righteousness and viewing others with contempt. But let's step back and examine the mindset and the expectations of the two people that Jesus uses to illustrate the parable, the Pharisee and the tax collector. Let's start with the tax collector. He's in a very repentant mood this day. He's beating his breast, refuses to look up to heaven. He's standing some distance from the Holy of Holies, not even daring to approach that place. He seems to realize that his actions as a tax collector have separated him from God. Those actions have destroyed the most important relationship in his life. Jesus uses him as a very model of contrition. And being somewhat of a cynic, though, I got to wonder, what were his actions on the day preceding he came into the temple? Or what did he do the day after, the day of worship? Did he conveniently forget this moment of repentance? Did he resume his life? Or did his humbling himself before God lead to a changed life? Perhaps he gave his ill-gotten gain away to the poor, becoming a model of piety, model of love, prayer, faith in action. We don't know. And for the purpose that Jesus intends in his parable, it really doesn't matter. The listeners of the parable would have identified this person immediately, knowing what his motivations were, with their preconceived and prejudices against this despised man. Well, the Pharisee is the more complex of the two characters. Pharisees were the respected religious leaders of their day. They studied the Hebrew Scripture, and they applied the law rigorously in their own life. They were renowned for their learning in a society that was barely literate at this time. When they were present, people paid attention. When they spoke, people listened. And just as we honor our pastor Sarah with our respect, the people around Jesus would have honored a Pharisee with their respect. And this man makes his case before God in this parable. It's one that we can understand. Do no harm, do good, and stay in love with God. That's the case that he lays out in his prayer. This all sounds like Wesley's 3 simple rules that we have studied here in our church. Do no harm, do good, stay in love with God. We all recognize these as the guidelines for discipleship and guideposts in our Christian journey. However, John Wesley, founder of Methodism offers a caution on the three simple rules in one of his sermons, saying this: these general rules are all external, whereas, on the contrary, poverty of spirit, mourning, meekness, hunger and thirst after righteousness, the love of our neighbor, and purity of heart are all internal. The righteousness of the scribe and Pharisee was external only. It may be said that the righteousness of a Christian is internal only. All his actions and suffering are nothing in themselves, being estimated before God only by the tempers from which they spring. There you go. It's all about our attitudes. Without inward transformation, the observance of these three simple rules are of no avail whatsoever. For Wesley, the inward change of heart would result in a new way of living, but it must precede this new way of living. Jesus warned his listeners that day not to trust in themselves in their outward display of righteousness, but trust only in the love and grace of God. Let's bring this forward 2,000 years to again ask the question, who are you going to trust? My friends, we live in perilous times for fact and objective-based opinion. Powerful forces seek to manipulate us with selective information to form our opinions about important and existential problems that we face. Politicians dismiss any news item that they disagree with as fake news, and they demand that we do the same. We are buffeted by people who seek to bully us into adopting their partisan agenda while telling us to ignore the thoughtful voices who counsel moderation and caution. Many people are only too happy to add their voice to the screaming fray and leave the critical thinking to others. Many, disgusted by the mindless hysteria, retreat into pessimism, apathy, indifference, or complacency, refusing to stand up for anything at all. These divisive forces seek to make us look inward, to glorify a sense of self, to worship the created rather than the creator. Friends, we are called into a greater truth. A certain and unshakable moral compass, and the divine peace that transcends the chaos and the confusion. We must stand firm and offer God's love to a needy world. We are called to offer a vision of a world ordered by light and love and life everlasting instead of that ordered by death, despair, and darkness. We can do nothing less as followers of Jesus and as disciples of God. Who you're going to trust? This question also has immediate relevancy for our congregation here today. The town hall meeting we had 2 weeks ago revealed a deep distrust in the church's leadership and the decision-making process. The meeting facilitator, who was Eric Strotter, who is a pastor from Bozeman, pointedly asked several people, do you trust your church leadership? It was quite apparent that communication has been lacking in our church, both from the council and the various committees to the congregation, and from the congregation to the church's leadership. And as so often happens, in the absence of good information, people tend to make up their own. Last couple of weeks I have heard that the Church council has settled on a specific roofing material. And I've also heard that the church council has decided to tear our building down. Neither one is completely true. There is an element of truth in both of them. What is true is that the church council has looked at several different roof replacement options. We liked one in particular that was presented and recommended by the trustees, but no decision was made. And at this point, all the roofing options are still on the table. We haven't made a decision. What is also true is that we have discussed in church council many scenarios involving this building, the needs of our congregation, and the resources that we have at our congregation's disposal. Now, I've been on the council for many years now, on and off, and I can tell you that this church's council has tried our best to be the good stewards of our church's resources, and they are somewhat limited. But we also, on church council, need to ask those hard questions. What is our vision for the next several decades? Does this building serve the needs of our church council? Can we afford to do anything else? Can we afford to replace the roof? And if so, with what material? These are all hard questions, but they're good questions, and we need to ask them all the time. The church council has committed itself to better and more open communication with our congregation through the newsletter, through announcements, through dialogue, and through a series of town hall meetings that will be held monthly. The first of these is the 2020 Budget Charge Conference on November 17th following the service. The Stewardship and Finance Committee, of which I'm the chair, will meet on November 1st or November 4th, at 12:30 to start working on next year's budget. We will prepare that budget to present to the church council on November 14th at 7 p.m. And all of us, the members, will vote on it at a charge conference on November 17th. You can be part of this process. We would love you to be part of this process. We have a pie that is only so big, and there's only so many slices that's going to come out of that revenue pie. How are we going to spend our resources? We'd love to hear from you. I would love to hear from you. Tell me. The council is also committed to addressing the concerns we heard expressed at that meeting 2 weeks ago. We need you to be part of the process, because that who you're going to trust is a two-way street. We need to trust that you are staying informed, that you keep up to speed on these issues that confront our congregation, that you are constructively involved, that you will simply show up and roll up your sleeves and make church happen. Who are you going to trust? To answer that question takes wisdom and courage, discernment, and faith. The choices are: to do nothing is easy. To stand on the sidelines and criticize the actions of others without taking any responsibility is easy. To talk the talk but not walk the walk is easy. But friends, that's not what God has called us to do. Jesus said that to be a disciple, we must daily take up our cross and follow after him. It's only through trusting and the surrender of ourselves that we will gain the kingdom of God and transform this world. God bless you all. Amen.
Amen.